And I've been learning a lot here about how lately, I feel like you always been teaching me a lot about learning to focus on the main point and not get caught up in a lot of the muddy water area. This is one of them. I'm going to read to you from the Lexham English Bible. I'm actually going to read to you. That's the Lexham English Bible translation up top. I'm going to read it to you also in the King James translation. Lexham English Bible and 1 Corinthians 13:1. We're talking about Paul and the topic of tongues of angels, and talking about dealing with difficult passages. He says, "If I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I become a ringing brass gong or a clanging or a clashing cymbal." King James reads, "Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and I have not charity, I am become as a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal." That's the way King James reads it. Lexham English Bible, to me, is a whole lot less confusing because he says, "if I speak." King James says, "though I speak." That's the way it's translated. And what happens is, in our minds, we translate that as "even though I speak" in the tongues of men and the tongues of angels. There we have the premise for what's called modern ecstatic prayer language. This is the baseline. This is where they platform from in this verse. Though I speak in the tongues of men and the tongues of angels. Again, as I showed you in Amos in the Bible study this morning, hopefully I was able to clarify the fact that we were looking at things through a metaphorical lens as he talked about how Yahweh would cause men to be captured with fish hooks. And I said, none of us really believe that Yahweh cast the line out of the sky and out of the heavens and hooked men by the upper lip and reeled them out of the way. There's metaphorical language. It's kind of like we use metaphorical language, raining cats and dogs. Or sometimes we'll say, "I mashed the poop out of my finger." That'd be nasty if you really did that. Or it's, raining cats and dogs, all these different, "I've called you 1,000 times. Where have you been? I haven't seen you in a month of Sundays." These old some of these may be Appalachianese terms you're not familiar with. Could you figure out that's a long time? When I say I haven't seen you in a month of Sundays, that's a long time. 30 Sundays, 30 weeks, 31 depending on which month. Metaphorical language. And here we have, "though I speak in the tongues of men," and Paul here is using a hyperbole. We have translated it, many people in doctrinal lines and denominations have translated this as "even though I speak in," as if he does speak in two different types of tongues, or aka languages, the language of men or the language of angels. But if we'll follow that up in the very next verse, in 1 Corinthians 13:2, he says, "and if I have the gift of prophecy, and I know all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith, so that I am able to remove mountains." Do we believe that Paul possessed all of those things? No. Does any man possess the gift of prophecy and know all mysteries and all knowledge? No. If you do, raise your hand. We'll have a meeting after the service. Because you'll probably need to be baptized too. I'm going to clarify something while it's on my mind. When Jeremy said, "Does anybody get along with your siblings all the time?" Kyla raised her hand. Kyla misunderstood you. What she thought you said is that any of you run over your siblings like a freight train all the time. That's what she really thought you said. I'm just clarifying that. So with that being said, the same principle applies in 1 Corinthians 13:1. He says, though I speak in the tongues of men, the tongues of angels. Paul, and I'm trying to show you an imagery here. We think in imagery. Look in pictures in your mind. Paul is presenting an idea. In 1 Corinthians 12, he's talked about all the different pieces of the body. None of you here in the room believe you're a literal big toe or an eyeball or an ear or a nose or a finger. Or we could go down the line to get see or a gallbladder. You know, I mean, it's all right to be a gallbladder unless it's flared up. And then I'd say Warren's dad would say it's a pretty big pain. So we understood the metaphorical language in the chapter before, and then he moves into this. This is called the love chapter of the New Testament. He says, if I speak in the tongues of men and the tongues of angels, but I have not love, I have become a ringing brass gong or a clashing cymbal. And then he goes into verse 2, and if I have the gift of prophecy, and by the way, if those of you, if you have the word, the King James translation, by the way, I want to verify this. Yeah, the word gift is italicized. So if you understand, anytime you're in the King James Bible and you see the word italicized in the Bible, that means the word is not literally in there. It's not literally in the manuscript, but it was added. For those who may be King James only advocates that may be under the sound of my voice, whether now or in a video later, understand that if you believe that the King James translation is the one only valid translation, you need to understand that there are added words. And that word gift is italicized, meaning it's put there so you can identify. It was placed there to try to clarify something. But through the sands of time, it has created some confusion, especially when it comes to the idea of the topic of tongues. Because when it says in the next chapter, chapter 14, which is called the tongues chapter of the Bible, when he says, though I speak in an unknown tongue, the word unknown is italicized, but it really reads, though I speak in a tongue. Here, when he says, when I have the gift of prophecy, really what it says, or if I have prophecy, or if I have the prophecy, and know all mysteries and all knowledge, which we know that Paul or nobody else on the face of this earth possessed except Yeshua. So we understand he's not talking in a literal format. This first word, though I speak in the tongues of men, Paul speaking what's known in the figurative language is a hyperbole. The gift, and let me give you the imagery here, the metaphorical language or the figurative speech, the words tongues of men would refer to, I'll use the term this way, just some old redneck from Blue Ridge. Meaning a man who has the most basic, simplistic speech. Paul even himself, when he talked about coming and presenting the gospel of Yeshua as him, the crucified and resurrected Christ, he said, I didn't come to you with excellency of speech. That's what a tongue of men is. The tongue of a man is without excellence in this metaphor. The tongue of men is just basic, old, simple language. The tongue of angels in this particular passage, by the way, is referring to excellency of speech. What he's doing is he's contrasting two ideas on one broad spectrum. You've got the most basic, we call the meanest, and I don't mean meanest as in angry, but the most simple, basic, brutish language, or the tongue and the eloquency of an angel. How many of you have ever heard, women, you ever heard of a man who's ever been referred to as a silver-tongued devil? You ever heard of that? How many of you women ever met one? You never met one? We have one honest person, two honest people in here. That was fine. How many of you are married to one? Don't you raise your hand. My point is, I just wanted to see how honest you were going to be. But the silver-tongued devil, we know neither does he have a silver tongue, neither is he necessarily a devil. He acts like a devil, and he speaks with what? Smoothness. Right? He's crafty in his language. He used the term in the loose way, he used the word seductive in his speech. There are also silver-tongued women, silver-tongued people in general. Met a lot of car salesmen who have silver tongues. Right? No offense if you sell cars. But the point is this tongue of angels is talking about the eloquency of speech. He's saying it doesn't matter how beautiful you speak. It doesn't matter how simple and basic and rude and plain you speak. He says, because if you don't have love, both of them are worthless. That's what he's saying. Both of those are absolutely useless. I have had men who have spoke simple truth to me that was profound. It wasn't with excellency of speech. And then on the other hand, I've heard men who had the gift of gab and had the ability to speak with a silver lining in their voice, who could absolutely deceive you beyond your imagination when it comes to religion. And don't think just because they're a smooth talker, or they're a good motivational speaker, or they capture your attention. I tell you, the one guy that I envy, and when it comes to speaking and be able to engage people and keep them entertained, I know that sometimes in mainstream churches, I've been to them, trust me, where they jump up and down and hoop and holler. I watched one guy take half his clothes off during the sermon one time. He started out in a three-piece Armani and a vest and a tie, and by the time he was done, he had on a pair of slacks, unbuttoned shirt, and no shoes. And my wife overheard somebody in the row behind us say, "Oh, it's getting good. He's taking his shoes off." But Andy Andrews, the video that you introduced me to, I love that video, the butterfly effect. Because I always like the guy that can keep your attention. And Andy Andrews can keep your attention. If nothing else, you're trying to keep up with him on the stage. Because that guy's like a rabbit hyped up on methamphetamine. He's all over the place. He's all over the place. I'm trying to keep up with him. But I realize that it's a method that he used to keep your attention. It's a gift he has to keep your attention, but to keep you focused and to keep it plain and simple in the truth. Wonderful video. If you don't know what I'm talking about, video by Andy Andrews called The Butterfly Effect, and if you want to watch it, we'll get you a copy of it. It's fantastic. It talks about the issues of what you do has a ripple effect through the sands of time that will affect countless number of people depending on how you respond and how you live your life in any particular situation. That's exactly what this verse is talking about. If you can speak beautifully. If you speak beautifully, but you operate with deceit, we dealt with that in Amos. When we talked about that in Amos a little while ago, Amos dealt with the fact Yahweh said, "I hate your festivals. I hate your assemblies. I don't accept your sacrifices," because they were showing up and they were looking all pious on the right day at the right times, bringing these offerings to the table. And Yahweh said, "It makes me sick. I won't accept it." Why? Same way we look at people when they come and they silver tongue talk and they say one thing and they do another. They're a hypocrite. And everything they said has been in vain. When you say and you don't do, it's hypocritical. That's the point of this particular verse, and this is what Paul's trying to say. This verse has absolutely nothing to do with the static, heavenly, angelic language vocabulary. This is a simple statement that's trying, as it follows up with verse 2, when he talks about having prophecy, all mysteries, knowledge, and all faith. So much faith that you have the ability to remove mountains. And again, the word "can" in that verse, so that I have faith so that I can remove mountains. The word "can" is not there. Take it away, scratch it out. It says, "And if I have faith so that I remove mountains, but I don't have love." What's the common denominator of verse 1 and 2? love. The focus of these two verses is love, not some sort of a language or some sort of prophecy or some sort of knowledge or mystery or faith. It's love. If you do not love, everything that you do is in vain. Verse 3, he goes even further. And if I parcel out all of my possessions, and if I hand over my body in order to be burned, but I do not have love, it benefits nothing. The word me is also there. If it's italicized, it's not there. So he says, but because it reads that it will be burned, but I do not have love, it benefits me nothing. No, he said it benefits nothing. You or anybody else. Listen to the contrast that Paul is making. It's all of these things that people are doing, or the way that they speak, to the point that they give all their possessions away, to the point they give their own life up to be burned. They sacrifice themselves. Now the imagery here is sacrificed on a sacrificial offering, a burnt offering. That's the imagery. He says, but I don't have love, it benefits me nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not jealous. Love does not boast. It does not become conceited. It does not behave dishonorably. It is not selfish. It does not become angry. It does not keep a record of wrongs. It does not rejoice at unrighteousness, but it rejoices with the truth. Do you realize in this verse here that there's a whole lot of people that I see on Facebook, social media, and even have met in person who seem to rejoice in the truth through unrighteousness? Think about that. They rejoice, they attempt to rejoice in truth through unrighteous methods. Because the scripture tells us we are to speak the truth in/by/through love. But there's many of them who want to speak truth through the edge of a sword. Sometimes that sword is in their hand, sometimes it's in their mouth. And I'm not talking about the sword of the Spirit. I'm talking about those who rejoice in people's struggles because they don't yet understand, and they're throwing this Torah truth out at people. And I get it. I was excited. I was zealous, very zealous in the very beginning. So zealous I wanted to strap a Bible to a Louisville Slugger and do a drive-by from here to Atlanta and hit everybody I could on the way. But it doesn't work like that. Because you know why? It wasn't rooted in love. It was rooted in frustration because people wouldn't listen. They don't want to hear it. And I realized that a lot of times, as Brother Jeremy's pointed out, it's not that they don't necessarily want to hear it. They don't want to hear it the way I'm trying to hand it out. They're not going to listen to it by the way I'm presenting it. I love the way, that's one thing I picked up from a gentleman we had as a guest speaker. He said, you know, you can serve the greatest steak on the face of the planet, but they won't eat it if it's served on a dirty plate. There's a lot of people in this movement. We're not attracting anybody because we're deterring people. We're deterring people away from us by the way we're trying to present truth. And many times some of the things they're trying to present are not truth because they're trying to present Paul as if, I started this whole series with Paul, the apostle, the apostate, or the hypocrite. Because they have presented him as an apostate, as a false apostle, because they can't understand what he's trying to say. And there's many people who have built entire denominational lines based on a verse like this, off of something Paul said that they didn't understand what Paul was actually trying to say. because they translated it, even though I speak in, as in Paul, because then they pick up in the next chapter in 1 Corinthians 14 where he says, for I speak with more tongues than all of you. There it is. And they read this verse, and then they down to that verse. Paul says, though I speak in the tongue, even though I speak in the tongues of men and the tongues of angels, and I speak in more tongues than all of you. There it is. But if you're reading in context what Paul was saying in that next chapter, well, let's just go there before we close. We're closing out. Of course, 1 Corinthians 14, verse 1, begins in the very same way. Pursue love and strive for spiritual gifts, but especially that you may prophesy. Now, the word prophesy here is not as in prophecy as in to foretell. While we all do foretell things in prophecy, when we say Yeshua is coming again, that's a prophecy. You're proclaiming that he will return. But prophesy in this sense really refers to more about telling forth rather than foretelling. Prophesying here is that Paul's not saying that I wish all of you could tell the future. That's not what Paul's saying. Paul's saying I wish all of you would excel in prophesying. Means you're proclaiming the gospel. That's what he's saying. That you would tell forth the gospel, the good news. He's not saying I wish all of you could tell who's going to win the football game next week or the exact date and time Yeshua's going to come back. That's not what he's trying to say. He's saying I wish you would prophesy. But he goes on and he says, let's get that verse where he talks about speaking in more tongues than all of them. I'm trying to find that verse. Where is it? Somebody help me find that verse. Is that it? I was just waiting to see if he's paying attention. I give thanks to Elohim or to God that I speak with tongues more than you all. Now people have translated that I speak in tongues more than all of you do. But it has been estimated, and many believe that we know. He said he studied at Paul later he proclaims and he acknowledges himself as being higher and above all the students that were in my class. He said, I sat at the feet of Gamaliel. I was the prodigy. I was the next in line. Many believe he was the one who was going to lead. He was the up and coming bright one who was going to become the rabbi. And he said, by the way, I took all that stuff that I counted as something as dung. As a big pile of stuff that some people mash out of their finger. He said, accounting is nothing. But notice what he says. Many people say, oh, well, Paul said that he spake in tongues more than everybody else. But it's believed that Paul spoke as many as 7 different languages. I think we have an account of about 3, at least 3, in the New Testament that we can see when he talks about he spoke in the Hebrew tongue and this and that and the other. But notice what he says in 1 Corinthians 14:18. He says, I give thanks to Yahweh, or thanks to God, that I speak with tongues more than all of you. Listen to what he says. But in the church I prefer 5 words with my mind in order that I may instruct other people than 10,000 words in a tongue. Now, if you read this, and we might talk about this next week in a little more detail when we're dealing with Acts chapter 2 and the event that took place at Acts chapter 2 at Pentecost that day, and one of the most overlooked and underrated miracles in all the world, because many people put the focus, there's a lot of denominations that put the focus on the gift of speaking in tongues associated with Acts chapter 2, but the reality is the miracle that took place wasn't the act of tongues. Well, the miracle that took place at Pentecost was the fact that Yahweh made provision that the gospel of Yeshua would go to the entire known world in one moment. How is it that each of these men speak in the native tongue and wherein we were born, and we hear the mighty works of Elohim? Are these men not all ignorant? That's what they were saying. They said, are these men not all Galileans? But what they were saying was, are these men not all stupid people from Galilee? because Galileans were considered to be base, low, mean people. He says, how is it that we all hear these words in the native tongue wherein we were born? A miracle that took place that's been focalized by many people on the ability to speak in some heavenly, angelic, ecstatic prayer language rather than the miracle that Yahweh gave the ability by the giving of the Holy Spirit, which was a fulfillment of prophecy, that He would put His Spirit inside people and give them the ability, and He would give them a soft heart, and He would cause it the law to be written on their heart, that they would obey from a heart of love, from a soft heart rather than a stony heart. He was contrasting the tablets of stone with the tablets of a soft heart. The Torah was the same. It was what it was written on that made the difference. And in that one moment, He gave an ability through the Holy Spirit for those men who had never learned or studied other languages to speak in a language, to speak to somebody else. It'd be a whole lot easier for me sometimes if I was trying to have a conversation with Ronald if I could just speak in Spanish just for a few minutes. We do pretty well communicating. I don't think we have a problem. Ronald probably thinks I'm crazy. I love Ronald. I love you, Ronald. And we have a great time, but sometimes it would be easy. Sometimes if you took that barrier away, we could talk, and that's what Yahweh done. He took the barrier away instantly, and there were devout Jews from every nation under heaven present at Pentecost that day, and they were given the words of life. The gospel went forward, just like that. And that's the miracle. But He says, I would rather have 5 words of understanding than 10,000 words in a tongue. In the same way, I believe I could speak for Paul when I say Paul would rather say, he would rather you say nothing at all and show people who you are by what you do, rather than run your mouth and do nothing. That's what he's saying. James testifies, I will show you who I am and what I believe by what I do, not by what I say. And with that being said, I want to close this out because we're pushing for time. And we'll pick up and continue in these difficult passages of Paul throughout the weeks until Yahweh leads me in a different direction, because I believe it's important. And trust me, if you're waiting on Galatians, we'll get there. We'll get to Galatians, because that's where everybody wants to go, is Galatians. We're going to get there, but we need to build a foundation as we go to understanding, being able to look at Paul and look at what he's saying, not the words or the images he's using, but what images is Paul, what are the images Paul is using in order to teach us a principle? The principle here, he uses the tongues of men and the tongues of angels against above and beyond, contrasting against love. You can say all you want to. This is the theme in the Bible, by the way, for all those who are listening. This is this simple. You can shout Yeshua from the rooftops. You can proclaim it until your face is blue. But if these don't display the works of Messiah Yeshua, this is worthless.